Hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm a national correspondent here at Time, and I'm so excited to be here with Jessica Byrd, founder of 3 Point Strategies and leader of the Electoral Justice Project at the Movement for Black Lives, and Jess Morales Rocketto, civic engagement director at the National Domestic Workers Alliance and executive director of Care in Action. Jess and Jessica, thank you so much for being here today. You both are two of the most impactful and just like the greatest leaders of some of the major activist movements that we've been seeing in over the last 5, 7 years. Can you help us understand this current moment in context? How has this moment that we're seeing right now grown from the Black Lives Matter movement and the activism over the last 3 years? And also, what might be a little different about it? Jessica, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Charlotte, and for all your good reporting. So this moment is different, and that's because movement made this moment different, and I feel really proud of that. And to be inside of this with so many really courageous Black people that are creating the conditions for change. So I was deeply politicized by Ferguson and then subsequently Baltimore in 2014 and 2015. And after spending over a decade in electoral politics, I started to really ask myself, was I contributing to Black movement in the highest way possible? And was I doing electoral work unapologetically? And the answer at the time was no. And the last 6 years, really, I have embedded deeply in the movement for Black lives to not only ensure that we have a connected and growing ecosystem of Black organizations and leaders, but to also ensure that we're using every single tactic at our disposal. The tactic that I'm most connected to is electoral politics and working on campaigns and thinking about the ballot box as just one place that we can get that change. But another clear place is direct action and civil disobedience. And really, we can't do either one of them without it. And so what we're seeing now is that the incredible uprisings of 2014, 2015, keeping our foot on the gas these last years, but also really growing a connected ecosystem has really meant that the uprising that we're experiencing now is even more connected, more deeply focused on the demands, and I believe that we'll win.
Jess, how do you think this moment compares to some of the other activism that we've seen in the Trump era, particularly around women's rights and immigrant rights? How does this moment fit in?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think it is on a continuum. I remember at the beginning of 2017 when people would talk about the Women's March, like, is this a moment or a movement? And then what we have seen is really sustained protest that has existed throughout the Trump administration around a variety of issues. But what I think is different about even this moment in the movement for Black lives and the protest that is happening is that we're seeing a lot of people who have never been engaged before being on the streets. And that's exciting. It means that there are new people coming forward. And as author and activist Charlene Carruthers, our friend, said, you want new people all the time. You want new folks to fortify the movement. So that's great for us. We're like, welcome to the newcomers. Like, we are so happy to have you. You are right on time. At the same time, I think what we're seeing in this rebellion is very different because of both people's anger in the face of the pandemic and the kind of I just think literally cooped upness that people have had being locked down in their houses, but also infiltration from outside agitators, from police who are taking action against protesters, I think, in ways that are different and quite escalated, even from in 2014 during Ferguson, which is quite different. And what you also have is a president in the White House who is an avowed white supremacist who is inciting this violence. And I think that that's something that's really important, because when you have someone at the very top saying that they support use of excessive force, that they support racial division and want to exacerbate existing racial divisions for their political agenda, that is very different than a group of concerned citizens who are fighting to keep and preserve the way of life in their in their small town in Ferguson, Missouri, and just literally protesting not to be murdered by the state. So, I think that like it is both very much in the vein of Women's March and Families Belong Together, and then it's also something that's like entirely different, in part because of the president's treatment of Black people.
So, on that note of sort of people who may be newly energized and newly activated by the killing of George Floyd, obviously, as you've said, every movement needs to have new people and needs to bring new people into the fold. At the same time, there are ways to be a good ally and ways to be a bad ally. Jessica, can you outline some mistakes that allies, particularly white allies, might be making, and also what you think the movement needs from allies, in particular from white allies?
Sure. So I'll take this in a couple of chunks. One is not only welcome, but if you are looking for a local political home, I hope that you go to the movement for m4bl.org and join us in not only building inside of our ecosystem, but meeting the demands where you are and getting the capacity, connection, and support that Movement for Black Lives can provide. So we're in this interesting moment where the last 3.5 years across multiracial movements, people have been trying to figure out where they get in, both in being co-conspirators and getting out of the way. And in many ways, what I often say is that our 21st century movements are built off the blueprint of the history of Black uprising and protests across the country. And that many people, in fact, should be looking to Black leaders at all times to follow not only our lead, but to learn with us, from the front lines. Right now, what I'm noticing is that people want to tell not only Black people how to feel, but about how to protest. They are not necessarily looking between the lines and lifting up the demands of local people and serving local organizations by sending resources and just cutting the check, but instead are spending a lot of time focused on rioting or stolen property or harmed property or inconvenience, the inability because of a curfew to not be able to order Grubhub at a certain time. That in no way is the side of history that I would believe that anybody who has even thought about, read about, considered where they would be in a civil rights movement that is dependent on disobedience. It's dependent on being uncomfortable. Do we actually think that cracking structural white supremacy would mean that we wouldn't all feel uncomfortable at all times, and in particular, Black people? And so I call on everyone to think about the intersectionality that folks like to retweet and to talk about, but actually exist to name the violence that is perpetuated on people who live at the margins. If you're a queer person, if you identify as trans, if you're a poor person, if you live in an area that is heavily policed, if you identify as a woman, if your skin is browner than mine, if you are coming at this not only as an essential worker, but as a person who's been deeply criminalized, you are living in way more intense versions of violence than some of your neighbors. It is incumbent on all of us to make a intentional decision on our relationship to safety and protecting those at the margins. I've seen incredible videos of white co-conspirators, not just allies, but co-conspirators standing in front of Black people as guns were being directed at their chests and at their children. I have seen white people surround Black people, knowing that they will be treated with less violent actions by the police. I have seen white people decide to get arrested first, knowing that it would give Black people an opportunity to make a plan because Black people and the police means escalated violence and heightened danger. And so we all have real decisions to be making right now. Which side are you on? It's very clear right now that there is a demonstrated, sustained commitment for the discomfort so that people will say out loud, I will defend Black life. And defending Black life means that I have to commit to defending the individual Black people in my community, the structural reform that Black people are asking for, the structural dismantling that is required. Everyone has to be really clear about what side they're on. And in choosing that side, make an intentional decision of where you live in defending Black people right this moment.
You know, there are a lot of people, particularly in the time of COVID, who maybe feel like they can't physically go out into the streets and join a protest. What do you think is what are other ways that people can get involved with this movement besides physically putting themselves in the streets with the protesters?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say is on this weekend, on Saturday, I did a Black Lives Matter protest in DC. We were in the car. It was 3 hours. It was one of the most fun protests I've ever been to in my life, to be totally honest. And so I think that, like, don't be afraid of doing things that feel a little bit different in terms of like going on the streets, but actually are safe. Like, we are getting really creative in these times. But the other thing I'll say is that, you know, I think that one thing that's been really living in my heart is, you know, I think a lot of people have donated to Black Lives Matter, or they have, you know, Black folks that they've checked in on. You know, maybe they've even read a book or two, an article or two. You know, they understand privilege, and that's great. You should do all those things. So this is your first time, like, do those things first. And then the second thing you should do, I think, is really think about how you as an individual perpetuate the racism and discrimination against Black people. And you can do that in a lot of ways. Maybe once you start thinking about it, you start to realize like a lot more than maybe you had considered. And some things that I'm really trying to think about right now are, one, like, you know, I always tell people this when they ask me for help recruiting people for jobs. And I'm thinking about it a lot because I think it applies in the same way. Like, what's your friend group like? Who do you spend time with? Do you actually know Black people that you can text? Because if you don't, that's a really big problem. If your whole friend group is white, or if your whole friend group is Asian, or your whole friend group is Latinx, whatever that is. So that's one thing, like, actually really be in relationship and know people who are different from you, and especially Black people. Two, I think that's really important is, you know, I am seeing a lot of folks be like, buy from Black businesses. And I agree. We should send our dollars to businesses that reflect our values. I do not think that we're going to capitalist our way out of this. Like, I just don't think that's part of why we're here. And so it's not going to be the way out. But I do think that you should think about what choices you can make in your consumer habits to reflect the values that you have. And I don't think you have to make every single choice in your life a political act, although for me, it is. But I do think you should try to like really think about, like, you have power as an individual. How can you use it? What are the ways that in your daily life you're doing that? One of those ways is by spending your money. And then the last one I think is, you know, what I also try to think about is my own thoughts and my own prejudices and the ways that they come out. Like, when a Black man is on the other side of the street, what do you think about that? Do you get scared? Do you have that same fear when it's a white man? What do you think when you see a group of Black teenagers together and their music is playing loud and you might not recognize it? Like, what do you actually think about that? Because those moments, I think, are really critical in understanding how you as an individual perpetuate anti-Blackness in your life and in your communities. As you begin to examine those individual moments, you also will start to be like, wait a minute, where did I learn this? How did this happen? What, like, am I just a terrible racist person? And the answer is, you know, to quote the Avenue Q musical that I listened to when I was in high school and I think about all the time these days, like, everyone's a little bit racist. And that is because that's part of our culture. That's part of our government. It's part of our society. So the good news is, all of us have a responsibility to be a part of changing that and can be a part of changing that. That's in who you vote for and what they actually stand for and who they actually feel accountable to. It is going and protesting, getting on the streets, but it also means that you can't then say when those same folks do things that you don't agree with, that their protest is somehow invalid. It just actually maybe means you don't understand why they're protesting and what would make them get to that place. And so this is the work of a lifetime, and it's the work of generations. We're building on the work of movements before us and people who will come after us. So the good news is you're not alone, and you don't have to solve systemic racism and capitalism and sexism by yourself. Far from it. There are actually so many people who have been trying to do it and will be trying to do it with you. And I think that's really exciting, because I think that what we are seeing on the streets now is that when people get together, it is really powerful.
So I thank you. I mean, I think that really helps a lot of people understand sort of how to grapple with their own lives and what they can be doing to support this movement. I saw a poll that was pretty interesting that showed that public opinion around racial injustice has really shifted since 2014, which to me suggests that the racial justice movement has been really successful in convincing people that this is a real problem and in helping people understand systemic racism. I'm wondering, though, with all of these protests and with all of this activism that we've seen, particularly over the last 3 years, there's always this question of how long can people stay in the streets, and then what happens next? So how do you build a durable movement with staying power to make sure that this issue doesn't just go away once people are no longer physically protesting? Jessica, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. Movement did that. Movement's winning. It's been winning. All of the progress that folks have experienced across the country over the last 6 years, the election of Black women mayors more in the history of this country is because movement did that. The reason that we've bailed out Black mamas by the thousands and changed the conversation on ending cash bail is because movement did that. The reason that people have a moral compass around families belonging together and that kids should never ever see a cage and no human should be caged is because movement did that. There are countless movement victories. 2018 was because movement did that. The Squad is because movement did that. Stacey Abrams is because the people of Georgia have been building a movement and did that. And white nationalism, its public face, its rise, its connectedness and resourcing is in direct result of movement winning. Every single moment of racial progress in this country has always been met with white violence. If folks are a student of history, as Jess named as your first job, as you work to becoming politicized and undoing all of the bias that this country provides structurally and implicitly in its culture, is that that after Reconstruction and the Emancipation Proclamation, the KKK was formed and the slave patrols easily, seemingly transitioned into what we know now as the police. And so what happened as movement was engaging and organizing the first Black president in the United States to speak honestly and to have results that for Black movement, we saw the rise of not only the Tea Party, of white nationalist forces, of Trump, of violent rhetoric. And now we see the result of movement winning is that white men and the power that they have earned in this country for just waking up in the morning is mad as hell. And they are willing to do anything to protect that power. And that one of the things that I feel like is a mandate for this moment, as individually in orgs and politically, is to say, then what are we willing to protect? What are we willing to fight for? If they are willing to go out in the streets with armed rifles, shooting up churches, of finding ways to terrify and scare us into submission, then what are we willing to do to fight back? And oftentimes the question of, well, what's next happens when people are being the most courageous in the street, And what I want to say to everyone asking that is, we've been building. We invite you to join us. If you go to m4bl.org, you can find a list of demands. You can make a commitment to defending Black life. You can write a check to any one of your local organizations to bail out the protesters who are being violently treated right now. After 2014, there became this call for body cameras across the country, for light police reform that came in the form of trainings and making sure that bad apples were ousted. In those last 6 years, as people have been building, experimenting, gathering data, we've determined that that is no longer enough. None of the police right now who are kidnapping protesters in DC, shooting people with rubber bullets in many other places, have their body cameras on. Right now, our demand is to defund the police, to take your hard-earned taxpayer dollars, redistribute it to the Black life that wants to thrive in this country. We can do that by taking that money that is being so violently used against citizens, and we can engage in community safety protocols. We can give to local economic programs. We can ensure that folks have the healthcare that they need to stay alive, that they can protect themselves by building incredible, thriving neighborhoods and communities. That actually is the safety that Black people want, is to know that they live in a place that loves them and that will fight for them and protect them. And what I can say now is that protest is one of the most powerful and important tactics for change. And what you should assume this summer and in November is that we are going to get back in the ring with Trump. We're going to win. And then we're going to have demands for a new administration. We're going to make demands for who the attorney general will be. We'll have demands for the first 100 days. And even more than that, locally, where we've already been building, new mayors, city council members who are committed to defunding the police will be elected. We will have legislation that names that Black people deserve to live a meaningful, full life with the public policy that they need. And from here on out, we will never again settle for less than that. And so for anyone who feels like this isn't enough, you're right. But we need all tactics moving on cylinders for Black people right now. So wherever you fit, whether you're in the streets, whether you're going to city council meetings, whether you're using your vote, your voice, your money, your morality, building community and places of safety for Black people, we need everybody moving on all cylinders to defend Black life.
So I just want to end with, this has been such a painful time for Americans. And I'm wondering, and for Black Americans in particular, I'm wondering if you can tell us about something that you've seen in the last week that really gives you hope, and that really kind of gives you strength moving forward. Jess, can we start with you?
Yeah, I want to just big up everything Byrd just said, because I think that sometimes people think that social movements are like what you see in the headlines, right? And you see that when people are like, who's our Martin Luther King Jr. and where have all these people been? Like, they've been there, and there's not one MLK. There's like 50 MLKs like all across the country, and honestly, not to blaspheme or anything, but they're better because they learned from him. And the reason I say that is because I think that people feel like these moments are the only thing that happens, but actually underneath this moment that seems spontaneous, it's not spontaneous, is all this hard work and love. I'm totally gonna cry. This is because this is about the love of our communities and the love that we have for this country and for the people in it. And I get so emotional about that because I can't imagine anything more beautiful than an expression of people who love something so much that they are willing to tear it down and recreate it again. And they believe deeply that every single person in this country has a role in that and has a meaningful way to contribute to that. And so that keeps me hopeful all the time. I get this question all the time, like, you work on family separation and racial inequality, and like, how do you keep going? And the answer is that we're trying to build a new America that is beautiful and inclusive and equal. So like, of course we are hopeful, because every single day we're fighting for that. What else is there?
Yeah.
Jessica, what about you?
I just think that Black people are so gorgeous in their righteousness and their resilience. They are gorgeous when their fists are in the air. They're gorgeous when they're mad. They're gorgeous when they're sad. They're gorgeous when they don't have all the perfect talking points. I just think that Black people are incredible. And if anything of the last week has shown you anything but our ability to stay in our dignity, our power, and to keep our eye on our North Star that we've always said, which is that we want to be alive. We want to take care of our families. We want to live in a country that respects us, that we've given everything to. We want to avenge the suffering of our ancestors, earn the respect of future generations, and be willing to be transformed in the service of the work. That's the mandate for Black people in this time, as we've heard from one of our Harriet Tubmans, Mary Hooks. I feel it every day. I see it in the faces of the Black people I'm organizing with and in the Black people that we're fighting for. I see it in the faces of my partner, who is doing a lot of care work right now, even though she's also being negatively affected by this moment. And I just think that Black people are gorgeous.
Well, Jessica Byrd and Jess Morales-Rocketto, thank you so much for joining us. I know this is such a busy time for you, so thank you for taking time out of your day to do this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte.